Hello and welcome to the Music is Medicine podcast. I'm Matt Creedon. Today I'd like to explore something I've been thinking about quite a lot lately. It's the phenomenon people sometimes call a download. A musical idea arrives unexpectedly. A melody appears almost completely formed. Words begin flowing faster than we can write them down. A solution to a problem suddenly becomes obvious even though we weren't consciously thinking about it. Sometimes an entire piece of music seems to arrive from somewhere beyond us. But where does it come from? Is it simply the subconscious mind making connections beneath the surface? Is it our higher consciousness trying to guide us? Is there a spiritual intelligence communicating with us? Could it be some form of collective consciousness? Could it even be extraterrestrial, or something that doesn't fit neatly into either the spiritual or the scientific categories we currently understand? I don't know, but I'm not sure we need to pretend that we know. But I think the experience itself is worth exploring. So let's dive in to when an idea arrives. Most creative people have probably experienced this in one form or another. You might have been playing your instrument without any particular intention when a melody suddenly appears. It doesn't feel as though you constructed it piece by piece. It feels though you discovered it. You play one note and somehow you already know where the next one wants to go. Sometimes it feels as though the music is slightly ahead of you and your hands are simply following it. I've experienced this while composing music. I might begin with a sound, a texture, or a single note, then something starts revealing itself. The music seems to have its own direction. My job is no longer to invent it. My job is to listen. This raises a fascinating question. Are we really creating the music, or are we receiving it? Perhaps creativity contains both. We bring our skills, experiences, memories, instruments, and the willingness to participate, but something else appears to meet us there, something we didn't consciously manufacture. So let's begin with a simple experiment. Play one note, then wait. Don't immediately play another one. Just listen. At first, your mind may begin labeling the experience. Oh, that's C. And that's a 1. And that frequency is vibrating at a particular number of cycles per second. You might recognize the instrument, the key, or the harmonic content. All of these descriptions can be very useful, but none of them are the note itself. They're labels we've placed upon an experience. The word C isn't the sound. The number 1 isn't the sound. The measurement of the frequency isn't the sound. Just as the word honey isn't sweet. To understand sweetness, you have to taste it, and perhaps to understand sound, you have to move beyond describing it and allow yourself to experience it. When we listen deeply to a single note, we may begin to notice that the note isn't actually alone. The instrument vibrates, the air vibrates, the room responds, other strings may resonate sympathetically. Harmonics emerge above the fundamental. The sound enters the listener's body and creates an experience the musician cannot completely control or predict. You played one note, but you didn't control everything that note touched. And perhaps an idea works in a similar way. One thought enters our awareness, but it may be connected to something much larger. We often imagine that the brain is something that creates consciousness, but what if, at least in some sense, it also receives consciousness? I sometimes wonder whether we might be like a little radio. A radio doesn't create the broadcast. It tunes into something already being transmitted. If the radio isn't tuned correctly, we hear static. We turn the dial and the signal becomes clearer. Perhaps certain states of consciousness allow us to tune into ideas, music, or guidance that we normally cannot hear through the noise of everyday thought. This doesn't necessarily prove that the information comes from aliens or spirits, divine beings, or any other external source. It could be that we're accessing deeper parts of our own minds. It could be our subconscious processing information outside our conscious awareness. It could be our high consciousness communicating with the everyday personality, or perhaps consciousness isn't as separate as we usually imagine it to be. Maybe individual minds participate in something larger, a field of consciousness, a collective intelligence, or some form of awareness for which we don't yet have the adequate language. I'm not presenting any of these possibilities as fact. I'm simply leaving the door open, because whatever the source may be, the experience of receiving something meaningful is very real. The sitar gives us a beautiful way of thinking about this. A sitar has sympathetic strings that aren't usually played directly. When you play the right note on the main strings, the sympathetic strings begin to vibrate. You don't need to strike them. You don't need to convince them. You don't need to force them to respond. They answer because there is already a relationship between the frequencies. Perhaps guidance works through resonance as well. An idea may be present around us or somewhere deep within us, but we don't notice it until we become capable of resonating with it. Then one day, something changes. We become quiet enough, open enough, ready enough, and the right experience occurs at the right moment, and something inside us begins to vibrate. The message may appear as a melody, an image, a sentence, a feeling, or an unmistakable sense of direction. It can feel like remembering something we never consciously learned. We call it a download because it seems to arrive whole. Perhaps it was always there, waiting for us to reach the frequency at which we could receive it. If you've seen water moving inside a singing bowl, you'll know that sound can reveal itself in extraordinary ways. When the bowl is struck or rubbed, the water begins moving. Ripples appear across the surface. Patterns form under the right conditions. Droplets can even begin dancing above the water. The vibration is invisible, but the water allows us to see what it is doing. The same thing happens in cymatics. Place sand or another fine material onto a vibrating surface, and at particular frequencies, the material begins arranging itself into geometric patterns. Change the frequency and the pattern changes. What we perceive as a single tone contains enough information to organize matter into visible form. Perhaps inspiration works in a similar way. The idea may initially be invisible. It has no physical form. Then it moves through a person. A musician turns it into sound. A painter turns it into color. A writer turns it into language. An inventor turns it into an object. The person becomes the material through which the invisible is made visible. This doesn't mean we're passive. The musician still needs to learn the instrument. The writer still needs to develop the ability to communicate. The painter still needs to understand the materials. A download may provide the seed, but we still have to plant it, nurture it, and help it to grow. Perhaps that's the partnership. Something arrives and we give it form. Then the intellect comes along carrying its sharp little knife. It wants to cut the experience into pieces. Where did this come from? Can I prove it? Was it my subconscious? Was it spiritual? Was it an alien intelligence? Am I imagining the whole thing? These questions aren't wrong. Our ability to question and discern is important. Not every impulse is wise, and not every unusual thought should automatically be treated as divine guidance. But the intellect can sometimes become so determined to explain an experience that it prevents us from actually receiving it. It wants certainty before participation. But perhaps mystery doesn't work that way. Sometimes we need to listen first. We can examine the experience later. Music theory is valuable, but the label C isn't the sound. A scientific explanation of vibration may be accurate, but it isn't the experience of lying beside a singing bowl and feeling the sound move through your body. The explanation is a map, and the map is not the mountain. We can use discernment without closing the door to mystery. If we are receiving guidance, how do we distinguish it from our ordinary thoughts, fears, and desires? I'm not sure there is one simple answer, but I've noticed that genuine inspiration often has a particular quality. It doesn't usually feel aggressive. It doesn't need to shout. It may be persistent, but it isn't necessarily forceful. It often feels clear, spacious, and strangely familiar. Fear tends to demand an immediate reaction. Guidance seems more willing to wait. Fear says, you must do this now or everything will be wrong. Guidance may simply say, this way. Of course, we still need common sense. We can test what we receive against reality. Does this guidance lead towards greater kindness, creativity, and connection? Does it help us to become more honest? Does it respect other people's freedom? Does it bring us closer to life or make us more frightened and isolated? A feeling of guidance isn't an excuse to abandon discernment. Perhaps discernment is part of learning how to tune the receiver. When we're learning an instrument, we often think our job is to add more. Another note, another chord, another fill, another clever technique. The intellect becomes uncomfortable with empty space. It says, surely I should be doing something. But as we learn to listen, the question begins to change. Instead of asking, what else can I play? We begin asking, what does the music need from me? Sometimes the answer is another note. Sometimes it's a chord. Sometimes it's silence. And sometimes the answer is simply wait. Let the note ring. Let the room respond. Let the other musicians respond. Let the next idea arrive in its own time. Perhaps we miss many of life's downloads because we're so busy producing noise. We're speaking, analyzing, planning, scrolling, defending, and trying to control what happens next. But guidance may be more like a sympathetic string. It doesn't respond to force. It responds when we become quiet enough to resonate with it. I like to finish with a simple listening practice. Choose your instrument and play one note, any note, then take your hands away. Don't immediately name the note. Don't judge whether it sounded good. Don't decide what should come next. Just listen. Follow the sound for as long as you can. Listen to the fundamental. Listen for the harmonics. Listen to the room. Notice any sympathetic vibration within the instrument. Notice whether you feel anything within your body. Then listen to the moment when sound becomes silent. Then remain there for a little longer. Don't rush to fill the silence. See if anything arrives. It might be another note. It might be an image. It might be a memory, a feeling, or a direction. It might be nothing at all. The purpose isn't to manufacture a supernatural experience. The purpose is to practice becoming receptive. Then ask yourself, when did the note actually end? Perhaps it ended when the vibration faded, or perhaps it continued as a feeling, a thought, or the beginning of another piece of music. Maybe this is what a download is. A moment of resonance between our everyday awareness and something larger. That something might be the subconscious mind. It might be our high consciousness. It might be a spiritual intelligence, a collective field, or another form of consciousness we don't yet understand. Maybe it lies somewhere between all of these possibilities. I don't know, but I'm increasingly willing to listen. Perhaps we are not alone in the act of creation. Perhaps the music, the ideas, and the guidance we receive are a part of a much larger conversation. And perhaps our role isn't always to understand who is speaking. Sometimes our role is simply to become quiet enough to hear. Thank you for listening to the Music is Medicine podcast. I'm Matt Creedon. Until next time, leave a little more space between the notes. You may be surprised what arrives.